So OHDOT is moving to a new version of OpenX Designer, which is resulting in a schema change and introducing compatibility issues, and you might be wondering, what does that mean for you? And so in this video, that's what we're going to go over. So first we're going to go over the compatibility issues, how they're introduced, a little bit about our workspace, and then what you might need to do depending on how you're interacting with our workspace. So what causes a compatibility issue is anytime Bentley changes the civil schema within their OpenX products, whether that be OpenX Designer, OpenBridge Modeler, OpenRail, OpenSite. Anytime they change the schema within that product, the older versions will see compatibility issues. So how do you tell when the civil schema changes? You're going to look at the first two parts of the product version number. When those change, that means that there is a schema change. So some examples for OpenX Designer. When 23 came out, that was a schema change. This example in the third number changed. That's a minor update, so there was no schema change there. The second number changed. That's a major update, so there is a schema change. And then again, an example, the third number changing. That's a minor change, so no schema change. Second number changes, schema change. And when the first number changes, you'll notice the second number resets to 0, which is going to indicate most likely a schema change. I have a link here to Bentley's lifecycle policy where you can find some more information on that. So now let's go over a little bit of our workspace. So our current workspace is named OHDOT CEV02. We do not maintain multiple workspaces for each civil schema. We just have this one workspace and we update it over time. So as we update the files within there and they get upgraded to the newer versions, the newer schema gets introduced into our workspace, which then makes our workspace incompatible with the older schemas. So I'll try to go over that a little bit more in a couple slides here, but I want to go over a little bit on how we push out our updates to our workspace. So we push it out on an as-needed basis. Whenever we want to get an update out to you guys, we don't wait for like a scheduled date. We just push it out as needed. We keep track of all of our updates in a running updates doc, which there's a link right here. Take you to our webpage where you can check out all the details on what files changed within particular updates. We also send an email out to our mailing list, so there's a link to subscribe to our mailing list to let you know when there's an update been pushed or maybe when there's an event coming up. So it's always good to subscribe to make sure you're getting notified of those things. Okay. So when it comes to updating the workspace, when we push out updates, if you're inside or working inside ODOT's ProjectWise data source, we handle updating that workspace there, so you don't have to do anything to get those updates when you're working inside of our data source. If you're not working inside our data source, there's really two main ways to get our update that we push out, and one is just through a zip file that you can download to get our workspace, and you'll see in the next slide that we do have the older releases of our workspace out there, which will make more sense once I show the screenshot. The other way that you can get the update is through a sync tool. So the sync tool you can use our installer to get, and basically you hit a sync button and it will bring down all the changes since the last time you ran the sync. The sync tool does let you select the version you want to maintain compatibility with. So that way you can still get updates that we pushed out that were not related to a civil schema. Whereas the sync tool, or whereas the zip file, if you grab an older one, it's no longer updated. So what I mean by that is if you go to our CAD downloads page, you'll see we have two zip files. We have one for 1012 and one for 1010. So whatever the latest one is, that's our current one that we're updating. So every time we push out an update, the latest zip file is getting updated with all those changes. But all the older ones, they're just kind of more of an archive. They're not being updated. The second we move to a new schema, that zip file just kind of stays there as just compatibility at that time. So any kind of files that we updated that had nothing to do with a schema are not getting added to these older zip files. All right. So that's just a real quick rundown of kind of how you can get those updates. Now, when it comes time for moving to a new civil schema, whenever we decide we're going to move internally to a new version that has a schema change in it, we're going to send an email out to our mailing list to let everyone know, hey, ODOT internally is going to move to this version on this date. Right? And we also have a link to our current CAD software where you can see the current versions that we're using on our website. Now, in addition to sending that email to our mailing list, we're also going to send an email out to anyone who's logged into our data source in the past year to let them know that we are updating internally, and in order to keep working in our data source, you're also going to have to use that version so you don't run into compatibility issues. So I'll go over more on that in a second here, but around that update time, I do want to mention there's going to be some buffer time, right? So we're saying we're updating on a certain date. We won't actually update our workspace for probably at least a month or longer after that. So we're trying to not introduce the compatibility issue right away, right? So we're saying, hey, move to this version. The workspace will stay compatible with the older version for at least a month or so. And then once we push out that update to the workspace that introduces the new civil schema, that's when you're going to start seeing that compatibility issue. So that date we send out is more of a soft date, but the buffer time is just there as a catch or fail-safe. So don't rely on the buffer time. So now let's talk a little bit more about what action items you might need to do if ODOT's moving to a new schema, right? So I kind of touched on it, but if you're working inside ODOT's project-wise data source, then you have to use the same civil schema that ODOT's going to be using internally. All right, and so part of the reason for this is that inside our project-wise data source, we don't maintain the compatibility with older versions, right? We have one workspace, and we just update it over time. So once we update that workspace to the newer one, if you're not running that newer version, you're going to see compatibility issues. So for that reason, if you're working inside our data source, you do have to keep with the version we're using. We will handle all of the configuration within ProjectWise, so there's really nothing the end user has to do other than making sure they have the right version installed. Now, that is not the case for if you're not working inside of our data source, right? So if you're outside of our ProjectWise data source, there's no mandate on what version you have to use, right? We've always had that stance from the beginning of the Connect Edition projects, is that we don't want to force a version on you guys if we don't have to. All right, so you're free to move ahead of us or lag behind us, right? If a new version of ORD comes out and you want to move to it before we move to it, you're free to do that. If you don't want to move when we move and you want to stay behind, you're free to do that as well. The real thing that you have to maintain is everyone working on a given project needs to be using the same version, or you're going to run into compatibility issues. All right, so you are free to set up and configure the workspace as you desire. So real quickly, I wanted to go over basically your two main options, because I get this question a lot when talking about moving to a new schema. So when you go to setup or configure, you really have two options, right? You're either going to maintain compatibility with the older civil schemas, or you're not going to maintain compatibility. Right, so if you're not going to maintain compatibility, then you really only need one copy of our workspace, right? And you'll just update over time. But if you are going to maintain compatibility, then you need to have separate copies of our workspace, one for each civil schema you want to maintain. And then you're also going to want to make sure that the config files for your worksets are also kept separated by civil schema, so that you know that this workspace goes, or this workset goes with this workspace, which is set up for this civil schema. Right. So I have a quick little screenshot kind of going over how one might organize that. Again, you're free to set up how you will. It doesn't have to be set up like this. But here's an option for how you might organize to maintain compatibility between different schemas. So you basically start with a main configuration branch for each schema. Right? So I have a custom config 1012, custom config 23, 24. Right? For every schema you want to maintain, you kind of have that main custom configuration branch. And then inside there, you could have the workspaces that are compatible for that civil schema. So in this case, for these three different schemas I want to maintain, I have three separate copies of our workspace, each one compatible with that schema. Right, civil schema I want to maintain compatibility. And then lastly, you want to make sure that the configuration files for your work sets are also separated, so that these work sets are going with this workspace, which is going with this schema. And then as long as for each ORD product or OpenX product you have installed for that's using that schema, as long as you point the configuration to that custom config, then when you load that version of the OpenX product, you should only see the workspaces that are compatible with that civil schema. It makes it really nice to keep track of. The last thing I want to note is if you're set up like this and you want to move, say, a project from using 10.12 to maybe using 24, all you'd have to do is take that config file and move it to that newer civil schema folder location, right? So I'd move it from this folder to this folder, right? I wouldn't move backwards because those files priority are on the newer schema, and moving backwards would just cause compatibility issues. Now, if you're not running or not trying to maintain compatibility with the older versions, you really only need one workspace right here, like as an example, and you would just update that over time, and you wouldn't need to maintain all the extra copies because you're not caring to maintain compatibility. So those are kind of your two main ways you would set it up. So I want to go over that in this video as we talk about civil schemas because it comes up a lot. So hopefully I've answered everyone's questions or most of people's questions on what they need to do or what might happen when we move to a new schema. But if I missed something, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.